This program is brought to you by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our Stanford Roundtable panelists and our moderator, Carlos Watson.
Good morning. Oh, I thought there was going to be more energy. Had a big victory last week. I thought there'd be a little more Stanford energy. Good morning. All right. We're not at USC. I want to welcome Stanford family, friends, alums, community members. We've got a fantastic roundtable discussion this year for the reunion. In fact, it seems that we chose the right one if you pay attention to what the Nobel Committee said yesterday. Today, our topic is courting disaster, the fight for oil, water, and a healthy planet. And joining us in conversation is as distinguished and as diverse a panel as you could hope for. General John Abizaid is not only a Bay Area native and a West Point graduate, but during the last 4 years was the commander of the U.S. Military Central Command, overseeing operations throughout the Middle East, including Iraq and Afghanistan, and so obviously we'll have a great deal to say. Actually, we've got another Bay Area native. We've got Justice Stephen Breyer. Long before he sat on the court, he cared a great deal about issues of regulation, which certainly will matter when it comes to energy and energy efficiency over the years to come. During the last 13 years as a sitting justice on the court, he's spoken frequently about civil liberties issues, which will also come up, and very recently, earlier this spring, was part of a slim 5-4 majority that for the very first time the Supreme Court weighed in on climate change issues. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. President John Hennessy has spent a lot of time on the issue of the environment. In fact, he's made it one of his 3 or 4 flagship issues here at Stanford, whether that's meant research into issues of climate change, looking at alternative energy, or indeed sponsoring roundtables like this. President John Hennessy has put that issue first and foremost here at the university. President John Hennessy. Dean Matson is a MacArthur Genius Grant Award winner in addition to being Dean of the School of Earth and Sciences. Some of you know her work, her very innovative work in Mexico with the Yaqui Valley Project, where she's tried to look for practical interdisciplinary solutions on questions of the environment, particularly in developing worlds. And she'll talk a lot today not only about climate change and not only about oil and energy, but also about water scarcity issues. I'm sure very few of you have read Tom Friedman. Indeed, I think we've all been lucky to read his work, 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner for his work, not only on foreign affairs issues, but also has spoken frequently about issues of the environment. He'll talk today about a wide variety of things, including the first law of petropolitics, I think. So Tom Friedman, please welcome Tom Friedman. John Bryson is the CEO and chairman of Edison International, the second largest utility here in California. And Fortune magazine said that his story was so interesting that it was a plot worthy of a Hollywood story. In 1970, some of you may know that this Stanford and Yale Law School grad helped co-found the National Resources Defense Council, was a very prominent Green Crusader, and then surprised some people when he joined Edison in 1984 and rose to become their chairman and CEO, and now has led Edison not only as the second largest utility here in the state, but also one of the leading purveyors of new alternative energy, including wind power. John Bryson, welcome. I'm going to start the conversation. This will be a far-flung conversation, and you'll see a lot of movement as we go back and forth. I've encouraged this group to be spirited, which I didn't have to do. We're going to start with President Hennessy. President Hennessy, we hear a lot about climate change. The IPCC, the United Nations panel that was awarded the Nobel Prize, said that we'll see temperatures go up 3 to 8 degrees over the next several years. We could see sea levels rise 7 to 23 inches versus 6 inches over the last century, so some pretty big changes. What does all this mean, and why should the folks here and the folks who aren't here be worried about issues of climate change?
Well, I think climate change is the problem of our time, driven, of course, by global demographics. The world population continues to grow. We'll go from just over 6 billion that we have now in 50 years to 9.5 billion. And that's assuming dramatic reductions in birth rate in the developing world. And of course, as the developing world begins to take more of their fair share of the energy resources of the world, population goes up by 50%, energy use is projected to double over that time frame. Right now, most of that energy, almost all of it, comes from fossil fuel sources and, of course, the accompanying problem of CO2 emissions, which causes global climate change. And that is going to reshape our planet's surface unless we find innovative ways to deal with that problem.
Pam, are you optimistic, as someone, Dean of the School of Earth and Sciences, are you optimistic that there really are a broad base of energy solutions, or is this something that we're talking about but it's still a long ways away?
Well, fossil fuels right now are the key for energy throughout the world. It's the sort of in the developing world as well as the developed world. And there's a lot of debate, and there has been debate over the last couple of decades about whether we have enough of the fossil fuels, coal, oil, and gas, to sustain us and to sustain this amazing growth that's going on. In the area of coal, the answer is we've got lots of it. We've got tons of it. And the real sustainability challenge there is that it is a major source of climate change. It's CO2 that is emitted from the burning of coal is part of our climate change problem. When it comes to oil, it's a different issue, and it is a resource that is under a lot of stress. We need it for most of our transportation systems, and while there are limited conventional sources of oil, more and more technology is leading us to unconventional sources that are harder to get, more expensive to get. The bottom line is I think there's a growing scramble around the world for that resource for transportation purposes. And so there's a security issue related to it as well as a climate change issue related to the burning of oil. So, as we go into the future, we're asking, what our alternatives are there for us. How much can we count on the fossil fuels versus other alternatives? How much can we use energy more efficiently so that we can reduce our demand for all of them?
Tom Friedman, a lot of the world looks at us and says we're 5% of the population. We create about a quarter of the emissions that the world's not happy about. And so it says the U.S. needs to solve the problem here. But I think I've seen you write, and I think I've heard you say that even if we do good stuff here, that may be necessary but not sufficient.
Well, obviously, for the reasons that President Hennessy alluded to, demand is going to be growing up around the world in India and China and Brazil, all over the developing world. And to me, we have to align ourselves with that development. Our, I think, responsibility is to create a model here that other people would want to emulate, a model of hyper-energy productivity. I'm not against Kyoto. If somebody can get all 160 countries in the world to agree on a 30-year plan for cutting emissions, God bless them. I prefer to focus my attention, energy, and column on how to make America hyper-energy productive, so we create a model that others would want to follow. I was just in Tianjin, China, about 3 weeks ago. I was the closing speaker at the Tianjin Clean Car Conference. China has 100 car companies. And so I was invited to be the closing speaker. And my message was, I got up, I said, there's all a bunch of car guys, Chinese car guys. And they're all listening on headsets. And I got up, I said, every time I come to China, young Chinese say to me, Mr. Friedman, you Americans got to grow dirty for 150 years. Now it's our turn. And my response to you is, it is your turn. Take your time. Take your time. Grow as dirty as you want. I just need 5 years, about 5 years, to invent all the clean, green technologies that you're going to need to buy before you choke to death, and I'm going to sell them all to you, and we're going to clean your clock. We're going to clean your clock in the next, we're going to clean your clock, how do you say that in Chinese, in the next great global industry, so take your time. Okay, that's when you see everybody starting to adjust their headsets. Okay, oh, what is he up to? And then they start to understand maybe this isn't just about compulsion, maybe this is an economic opportunity that we don't want someone to steal a march on us. You'll get a lot bigger change out of that than you will lecturing them about their Kyoto limits.
John Bryson, Tom Friedman. Tom Friedman set you up as well as he could. Is there money to be made in alternative fuels and doing these things? Is this, as a guy who's got to meet quarterly Wall Street earnings reports, is this realistic, or is this something that is still several years away?
I think Tom's absolutely right, and I think the vision is really a striking vision. We have a little mini demonstration of all this in California. California hasn't always gotten it right in the electricity sector by any means, but California is doing extraordinary things in leading the way in energy efficiency and with respect to renewables and the big challenges, and they're huge, on integrating renewables that don't constantly provide power into electric grids at scale. But as I said to a group of people the other day in our company, we try to do well by doing good, and we've been able to do that pretty well with a number of programs, including now, there are lots of things I go into detail on, but now California has simply adopted directly a month ago a major incentive for utilities to make extra money by finding yet more creative ways to convey energy efficiency programs to all the people that are utility customers in the state. That'll take us yet further. And California, with the programs we have, has had no increase in per capita electric usage since 1990. It's the same since 1990 because of the unique programs that are carried out across California. We've done so much more than anybody else. We're making money in alternative energy right now. We're making money in wind energy right now.
But let me ask you, John, do you think that, pull Adam Smith in here for a second, do you think that it's rational and in your interest to go and do that, or do you think that without California stepping up and imposing some of the most progressive or aggressive regulations in the country, that realistically your billion-dollar company wouldn't be going after wind, after solar, and some of the other things that you're doing today?
Well, we couldn't do things that were absolutely contrary to our shareholders' interests. We're not appointed to do that. So what we tried to do is encourage the creation of incentives. And we've done that for a long period of time, and it stretches quite a ways back. And California took a huge step in 1980, and it decoupled for energy utilities earnings from revenues. And you have to do that to even get started in really motivating the system. Because if the effect of more energy efficiency is reduced revenues that translates to lower profits, which isn't essential, then you don't, people give it lip service, but it isn't real. This is entirely real.
Very, very much so. Justice Breyer, before you joined the court in 1994, you taught administrative law. You spent time on Capitol Hill looking at issues of regulation. In fact, played a key role in the deregulation of at least one industry. How important do you think the court's role will be in, if you will, monitoring some of these environmental issues that in some cases even insisting that either federal agencies like the EPA or potentially corporations play a more active role?
Well, you're asking me a question as a judge. I'm a judge. And you want to know, is government important? You said courts. If you'd said legislature, if you'd said regulators, I would have said totally important. If you say courts, I'd say not important.
You say not important despite the fact that you were part of the majority earlier this spring.
I think if people want to get something done, the place to do it isn't a court. Take that case. It had 3 parts to the case. This is easy for a judge. I mean, the issues are hard, but at least we know what the issues are, some of the time. The first issue was a constitutional issue. Can a person who's hurt by the environment, does he have enough concrete, solid injury to come in and complain? That's a technical constitutional question, and we said yes. Now that's something of a victory for the environment because at least people realize that global warming can hurt you in a concrete, real way. So the door is open, often, but it's open to everyone. And people who don't like the environmental movement can walk right through too. And that's the way it ought to be. The court is open to everyone within those constitutional limits. Then there's a second issue. The second issue was a statutory issue. Congress had passed a statute telling the EPA, regulate certain things, or at least look at them. And the question was, did carbon from cars fall within that? I thought yes. So did the majority. You know why I thought yes? Because I believe that's what Congress wanted. I got that out of the statute. Suppose I'd believed that Congress didn't want it. Well, I would have interpreted it the other way. Because my job is to find out what Congress wanted. So if you want environmental protection, go to Congress and get them to want it. Don't come to me. Now here's a little bit more positive because there's a third issue in the case. And the third issue is the EPA had thought they didn't have the authority to regulate, but we looked at that statute and says, yeah, do it. You can do it. Come on. All right, get going, do it. But wait, they said, even if we have the authority, we don't want to do it. Now, they did say that, but they only said that in a few words at the end of this opinion. So now we have a new power with most of these agencies, and that is to say, is what they say arbitrary, capricious, and abuse of discretion? Those are code words, and they mean, is this agency bananas? Now,
that's formal legal speak, right?
Yeah, right. Now, when we looked at that, we thought the reasoning is so poor and so far out that what they really mean is they don't think they have the authority. So get back and you decide whether you really want to do it or not, knowing you have the authority, because what you did here is out to lunch, okay? And not even a banana lunch. Or there we are. Now, see what we could do there? But note, it depends highly upon being fair to everybody and highly upon Congress telling us what it wants. But here you can help because, of course, on that third part, the more the scientists, the more the experts, the more the people who work in the agencies, the more those who are affected, the more they can agree upon what is in the ballpark of agreement and disagreement, of what's the mainstream, of what makes common sense, the easier it is for us to say, what's out to lunch? You see?
Yeah.
And so that suggests that work of all kinds, not just in Congress, helps a lot. Reducing to English, because unfortunately we do not speak techno-speak, what the issue is, what the facts are, what facts can be agreed upon, what the range of solutions is, and why or why not the agency should or hasn't adopted them. That kind of issue is in court quite a lot. But remember the standard there. It very much favors the agency, what it decides to do. And that's why I say that legislative branch is important. That executive branch with its agency, very important. The courts, well, hardly at all, but I'll concede a little bit some of the time.
A little bit interesting. So while the courts have led lots of big fights in our time, you're saying not necessarily this one. General Abizaid, we clearly have seen, Chairman Alan Greenspan recently said as he came out with his new book that he thought part of the reason, if not the main reason that we're in Iraq right now, has to do with oil and the fight over oil. And whether that's exactly right or whether the reality is that part of our involvement in the Middle East is tied to our oil dependence, energy dependence. Clearly we're there. Clearly lots of troops are there, and many of your own troops have died or been wounded. Give me your estimation, having spent the last 4 years commanding troops there, about the ability to, anytime in the near term, to bring some tranquility, frankly, to Iraq. Is that a reasonable hope over the next 5 or 10 years, or is it the long war that you've talked about?
You know, Carlos, I came here to watch a football game.
You're looking for these guys to throw passes?
And I also came to listen to Tom Friedman. And I think it's very unfair that I have to answer these hard questions. Look, it's first of all, I think it's really important to understand the dynamics that are going on in the Middle East. And of course, it's about oil. It's very much about oil, and we can't really deny that. And from the standpoint of a soldier who's now fought in the Middle East for 6 years, my son-in-law has fought there for 4 years, my daughter's been over there, my son has served the nation. My family has been fighting for a long time, and the only reason I bring this point up is to make sure that we understand that this isn't about being a general, it's being about a citizen. And we have to understand that what's happening in that region has an awful lot to do with globalization. It's a battle of the integrators versus the disintegrators. And the epicenter for the problem is the Middle East. 4 big problems exist there that our country is going to have to deal with for a long time. The first is the rise of an ideological, very, very dangerous movement as exemplified by Sunni extremism and Osama bin Laden and the many groups that are allied with him. The second is the rise of Shia extremism as exemplified by a nuclear-armed Iran, which is certainly in the offing today and a state that's very, very aggressive. Third problem is the continuing corrosive effect of the Arab-Israeli conflict that absolutely, positively needs to be dealt with. Otherwise, this continued corrosive conflict drives people to the extremes in a very difficult way. And the fourth problem has to do with the need for the global economy to depend upon the flow of oil from the Middle East. And it is this dependency that we have to understand can't just be dealt with by military means. We must adopt, as a matter of national security policy, a way to reduce our dependence upon Middle Eastern oil. And it's essential that we do this. Now, as we go about dealing with these problems in the Middle East, there's 2 accelerators to the difficulty that we face there. The first is the proliferation of nuclear weapons. And while I used to lose a lot of sleep over the difficulties of dealing with the security problems in Iraq and Afghanistan, it was really Pakistan that kept me up at night. The problem of a meltdown in the society that would cause a nuclear weapon to go loose, to be transferred into the hands of the extremists, should be something that we worry about. The other problem that you need to understand that we're dealing with in the region has to do with the globalization of the security problems. It's just not a nation-state problem. Al-Qaeda is not situated in the Middle East. Al-Qaeda is a global phenomenon. It's a non-state actor. It seeks to cause its ideology to be spread in the region, and it seeks to do us grievous harm. The problem for us is that we can't just deal with the problems militarily. We need to have an economic, diplomatic, political component to the solutions that must not only be driven by the United States, but accepted by the international community in a way that allows us to move forward in a positive way. Having said that, as difficult as it is, and as difficult as Tom Friedman knows it is, I believe we've got to stabilize Iraq, we've got to stabilize Afghanistan, we've got to do our diplomatic best to find some resolution to the Arab-Israeli problem, and most importantly, we've got to reduce our dependency on Middle Eastern oil.
Tom Friedman, you early on in 2003, for some different reasons, thought that we should go in to Iraq. In 2006, you said that regretfully, our effort to, in some ways, change Iraq and change the world there hadn't worked and that we should disengage. Do you think we can disengage soon? And if so, what do you see as the best road going forward? Clearly, General Abizaid has just pointed to really a multifaceted, multi-layered problem that now involves increasing nuclear risk.
Well, let's go back to 2003, and before I do, I just want to say, I've had the pleasure of actually visiting Iraq with General Abizaid, and he's a reminder of why every time I go to Iraq, I always feel better about America, but worse about Iraq. And because when you see the kind of young people we have over there and the kind of leadership they have, it does make you at least feel good about this country. Let's go back to 2003. In fact, I would say they're a lot better than the people who sent them, but I won't go there. Let's go back to 2003. I never believed in the WMD argument, wrote that I didn't believe there's any WMD in Iraq, and if that's why you were going, don't go. What was on my mind? Well, I kind of have this view of the Middle East that we've treated the Arab world, Democrats and Republicans, for the last 50 years as a collection of big gas stations. That's really what we've treated them.
As a collection of?
Big gas stations. Okay. The Algeria station, Libya station, Saudi station, the Iraq station. And our message to them was basically the following. The message was, guys, because it was only guys. Guys.
Maybe part of the problem.
Yeah, it was part of the problem. Yeah. Very much so. The message was, guys, here's the deal. Keep your pumps open. Keep your prices low. And be nice to the Israelis. Don't bother them too much. And you can do whatever you want out back. You can treat your women however you like. You can print whatever crazy conspiracy theories about us and the rest of the world in your newspapers as you like. You can deny your people, your young people, whatever civil rights you want. You can preach whatever intolerance against other faiths from your mosque that you like. Just keep your pumps open, your prices low. Be nice to the Jews and do whatever you want out back. Well, it was my view that Osama bin Laden and 9/11 represented the distilled essence of everything that was going on out back. And so therefore, now this is not crossfire, I don't need any applause. It was my view that, some things are true even if George Bush believes them, all right? It was my view that taking seriously the issue of how we collaborate with the Iraqis, with people in the heart of the Arab Muslim world, to change the context of what was going on out back, that actually was a really important issue and something to think seriously about. And so I checked my politics at the door. You don't need to guess who I voted for in recent elections. But I thought that was a really important issue. You know why, Carlos? Because context really matters. the context within which people live their lives. And the best evidence of that is actually the second largest Muslim country in the world, which is not Pakistan, which is not Saudi Arabia. The largest is Indonesia. It's actually a country called India. Well, here's an interesting statistic. There are no Indian Muslims, as General Abizaid can tell you, in Guantanamo Bay. And until the recent attack, even in London last year, we knew of no Indian Muslims even in Al-Qaeda. Statistically, there may be, but isn't that odd? This Guantanamo Bay is like a Noah's Ark from all over the Muslim world, okay? But no Indian Muslims. Isn't that interesting? Why do you, could that be because the richest man in India is a Muslim software entrepreneur, Azim Premji from Wipro? Could it be because India had a Muslim president? Could it be because there's an Indian Muslim woman on the Indian Supreme Court? Could it be because I was actually in New Delhi when we invaded Afghanistan, and there was a debate live on Indian TV between the leading imam of New Delhi and the country's leading female movie star at the time, who was an Indian Muslim woman, and he called on all Indian Muslims to rise up and join the jihad in Afghanistan against America. She told him to shove it live on Indian TV. Because why, Carlos? Because she lived in a context that empowered, enabled, and protected her to do so. So I have a million regrets about how Iraq has played out, okay? A million, believe me. But I don't regret taking seriously our need to think about creating a context where, guess what? Where, like India, young people can grow up, and if they want to start a newspaper and have a voice, they can do it. Where young people can grow up, if they want to start a business, they can do it. Where they can think and say and realize their full aspirations, because guess what? People who do that, have that context, tend not to want to wrap themselves in dynamite and blow themselves up. They tend to want to be a part of the world, not disintegrate it.
Do you have optimism that, you know, recently at the Democratic debate, with the exception, I think, certainly the three leading contenders, John Edwards, Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton, when asked whether or not, if they were elected at the end of their first term, they would pledge that all the troops would be out, none of them would take that pledge. So they certainly saw it as something that would continue. Do you have any optimism that over the next 5 to 10 years that we can get to a place of stability in Iraq?
You know, what my problem is with Iraq right now is we made so many mistakes, many of them needless. If you created a list of the 100 things to do wrong, we probably checked every box, you know. And the worry I have now is, you know, you can't TiVo history. You can't say, oh, we can do in 2007 what we should have done in 2003. You can't just TiVo history and do it over. So what General Abizaid was dealing with the last few years, what General Petraeus is dealing with, are the accumulations of something that just has exploded and shattered now into so many pieces. What bothers me about the current situation is that, you know, whenever I thought about the surge, and people asked me about it before, I said, you know, the surge reminds me of a couple who get married, and after a kind of stormy courtship, you know, but they finally decide to get married, and then the marriage really starts to go bad, and they say, let's have a baby. Okay, that will, you know, let's, you know, if the underlying thing isn't there, you know, if the underlying thing, don't add pressure. So, yes, the surge is necessary, but it was never going to be sufficient. The sufficient thing was always bringing Iraqis together to take responsibility for their own future. And, you know, I said before the war, is Iraq the way Iraq is because Saddam was the way Saddam was, or was Saddam the way Saddam was because Iraq was the way Iraq is? That it was a place that could only be held together like that. You know, it seems more like the latter than the former. What's missing now, though, is Petraeus has done all he can. In other words, he's brought security to the point, you know, where it can create the room for politics. From here forward, politics has to drive security. Only reconciliation can do that. And I don't think just sitting around waiting for Iraqis to do that is the way. I mean, look, if I were President Bush, I'd be curled up in a fetal position under my bed with Barney barking for me to come out, but I'll just say this. If I were President Bush, I would be on the phone to our best negotiators, Henry Kissinger, Dick Holbrooke, Dennis Ross, George Shultz, whoever, and I'd say, here's the deal. I want you to go to Baghdad, and I want you to move into the green zone, and I do not want you to come back without one of three messages to me. You've struck a deal, like we did at Dayton and Bosnia. You've concluded there is no deal, but we can partition somehow this country. Or you've concluded there is no deal possible because the leaders that have emerged in this country are so venal, corrupt, and impossible, and we are going home. But just sort of sitting around here, waiting for Godot while more young people die, for reasons that are not at all clear to me, is why I came to that conclusion.
Pam Matson, not a lot of optimism from Tom Friedman about our ability to get things in a stable place in the Middle East, and yet there continues to be a tremendous reliance upon oil from that region, although obviously we draw oil from other parts of the world, including our neighbors, Mexico and Canada. Talk to me about, in your mind, some of the most practical and attractive alternatives to oil dependence over the next 20 to 30 years. What do you see as kind of 2 or 3 that offer real hope, real promise?
Well, I think first and foremost, energy efficiency in everything we do, and it's easy. Actually, there are a lot of low-hanging fruit in energy efficiency that we can engage in every day, and I think part of the problem is people just don't know exactly what that is. We have leadership.
When you say energy efficiency, you're saying my refrigerator, my air condition,
my light bulbs, my car, my simply buying automobiles that get a few more miles per gallon in the class of automobile you like could make a big difference in this country. But certainly switching to hybrids, plug-in hybrids, other newer types of vehicles, hopefully that are built with ultra-light materials and have very high energy efficiency, there's huge opportunities out there, and we just have to decide to invest in them and go for it. And it's win-win. It's, you could save money by saving oil in that case. I think alternatives as well, like biofuels, are going to be part of the solution. The worry I have is that we jump into them with both feet without really looking. And biofuels is a wonderful example of focusing too narrowly on one issue, or maybe two, and not looking at the broad range of environmental and social issues that are related to it. So, for example, we're growing corn ethanol. We're growing corn for ethanol all over the country, and it has huge consequences for water quality, for water use, for food production, for the loss of conservation lands that are important for other services that are provided to us by natural ecosystems.
You're saying we could win here and lose there?
Yeah, we could lose there, but the challenge is to figure out how to win, because we could do it well, we could do it better, and it could be and should be part of the solution, but it's not going to be the whole answer. So there's, I think, a lot of research effort going right now into thinking about biofuels as systems that hopefully maximize the benefits in terms of producing the fuel, but also minimize any other negative consequences like food security or environment.
John Bryson, 2 of the areas that you hear people get excited about on a very basic popular level, certainly here in California, are wind as a potential source. And you hear a lot these days about plug-in hybrid electric cars. But I've heard you say that it's not that simple, kind of similar to what Pam is saying, that while we may get excited about that, and while in fact your company is doing a lot in this direction, that there are going to be a couple things for us to think about.
Well, they're for sure things to think about. I think Pam's message is exactly right. High urgency to deal with these energy issues, critical near-term goals to be achieved in the context of a long-term and deliberate, broader approach. So renewables, I mean, we have on our system 17% of the kilowatt hours we provide our customers are from renewables, and that doesn't include big hydro. I mean, this is new renewables. It's much the biggest in the world, I believe, among utilities, much biggest in California. But it's not nirvana. I mean, all these resources have limitations. So we're a big wind power generator. We're doing lots more all over the United States now, not so much in California right now. But wind is an attractive resource primarily for avoiding, say, natural gas use at certain times, but it does nothing to deal with the largest problem we have in California, and that is meeting peak demand. So the big challenge on an electric system is you put all this capital investment in against the handful of hours in a year in which demand is at its peak. Wind doesn't blow when you need the power. So
You're saying it's not always available and we can't always store it to use it?
yeah, then it's not always available. It's intermittent, quite high capital cost. The global economy effect. For us, wind projects that we're building, Maine, Iowa, Oklahoma, a lot of other places right now, the cost of the underlying turbines, machinery, erection have gone from $1,000 a kilowatt to $2,000 a kilowatt in the last 2 or 3 years. So prices going up, heavy demand. Solar is critically important. And so for a company like ours, what we can do is we can make possible solar technologies at a commercial scale by committing to long-term power purchase contracts against our credit, spread over 30 years and at scale. But it's still really embryonic. I mean, we have 90% of the, just in our company, we have 90% of the solar in the United States that is grid connected in any way. So not photovoltaics on rooftops. It's nothing. It's nothing. So there's a tendency when we talk about these things to jump overly rapidly to the conclusion this is going to be the answer. On plug-in electric vehicles, that's a particular enthusiasm of mine. I mean, I think it is an extraordinary potential, but it has a ways to go. I'll just describe what it is, and I'll try to be real brief about this. But gasoline, so we're talking about oil use, the effects of heavy oil demand on energy security, world security. Gasoline has had a monopoly, so oil heavily goes into gasoline. Now, oil isn't used for electricity generation in the United States meaningfully at all now. It was true 20 years ago, not now. So gasoline's had this monopoly. Pam mentioned biofuels. We've got to do biofuels in the right way. There are real downsides. You know, some of this has more energy costs than it has net benefit. So again, deliberation and smarts are required. In the electric grid, you have an incredible resource in the United States because, as I said, it's built mostly to deal with peak. One of the things that we're doing and needs to be done across the industry is to use digital technology, current first-rate broadband communications capabilities on the system. You need to send to customers the price of power, the real-time price of power, off peak. So overnight, power is very low cost. What can be done, and I believe will be done, and will be done fairly quickly, is people will have in their garages a household voltage plug, just like a plug anywhere else. They'll plug in to recharge the battery overnight.
Charge your cell phone and your car.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a big announcement, probably not much seen yet, but Toyota announced about 2 days ago that the Japanese auto show, it will have a plug-in electric vehicle. General Motors is really charging this Volt project. They're going to have something by year 2010. It will be less expensive than the cost of gasoline. Electricity overnight on a smart meter where you really get the price overnight, so you're sending price signals. People plug in, save bills, huge environmental benefits. We just did a big study with the Natural Resources Defense Council Electric Power Research on the aggregate savings, huge greenhouse gas savings over time, so people get benefits that way. Convenience. We've got to do more on battery technology, but it's improving. The lithium-ion battery, which has lots of applications beyond this. We need to put more money, we need to put more commercial force, and we have to unleash the entrepreneurship, and the battery manufacturers are doing big things. We have a joint venture with Ford. Ford actually started the electric vehicles in the country. We have a joint venture with Ford just to do this in ways that create basically common systems so that interconnection issues don't arise across approaches to this. Hugely exciting, I think, and the energy savings are enormous, potentially, and all the related pollution effects. So you put it all together, you have a domestic resource. The electric grid in the US right now, according to the Department of Energy, the existing grid with no new power generation built at all would allow plug-in electric vehicles to be built to replace 70% on the cars on the road. That, of course, is not going to happen. But you have a wasted resource in this grid, and it's a domestic resource. It's not an overseas resource. 70% of the vehicles could be replaced to these plug-in electric vehicles. You don't have to build anything more, and you get all these benefits. So it's going to be slow coming, and obviously I'm a believer in this, but it's exciting.
You think there's some opportunity there?
Yeah.
President Hennessy, Stanford and Silicon Valley generally have been at the epicenter of so many different technology breakthroughs, and you've said here that you think this is a big issue not only because of your kids and the planet itself, but that you think that there's an opportunity and indeed a need for Stanford to play a role in helping some of the breakthroughs. Talk about 2 or 3 of the things that a successful Stanford would do over the next 20 years to move the world forward on climate change issues.
Well, I think it is absolutely true that we need some real technology breakthroughs. Start with solar cells. The last major breakthrough in solar cells was made here about 15 years ago. New material, improved efficiency. We need to boost the efficiency of solar cells so they are a competitive, not just with a subsidy, but without a subsidy, competitive to fossil fuels. That's going to take fundamental research, new materials, go into so-called 3-5s, completely different material structure, which will allow us to get higher efficiency. But it starts with fundamental physics.
Cooperation with venture capitalists, by
and
the way, on that?
cooperation with venture capitalists. I think this is going to be the Silicon and Green Valley you live in here, because this is the head of the new revolution in green technology. Biofuels. Pam touched on biofuels. Corn-based ethanol is not the solution. It's not the solution. Either dollar-wise, by the way, or global
candidates in
warming.
Iowa might disagree with you.
Who would?
The candidates who are in Iowa right now might disagree with
They
you.
might disagree. They might disagree. It may be a good way to keep farmers busy growing corn, but it's not a good thing either for the environment or for efficient energy. We've got to find a new solution. That solution is going to begin with new biotechnology that's going to create a different way, that's going to work on cellulose conversion, that find a different alternative to corn-based ethanol. We will find it, but it's going to take fundamental research. And I think that's the key. We're at the beginning of this phase of really renewing our investment to research, which is going to serve this country over the next decade or two as we begin to roll these companies out.
Tom Friedman, you've offered up, I think, an interesting idea about what you call congestion pricing as a way to help combat some of the issues around climate change. Can you explain simply to people what's happening in Stockholm and other London, other parts of the world, and why you think that could ultimately make a difference here in the U.S. in terms of lowering pollution?
Well, congestion pricing as it exists in Stockholm and London today is pretty simple. If you want to drive in downtown Stockholm or London, they have a way of, through cameras and other smart technologies, basically monitoring the entry points to these two towns. And in London now, if you want to drive in central London, it costs you £8. That's $16. And in
Pretty
Stockholm,
big toll.
I don't recall what it is. Then what they do is, because that reduces traffic, because a lot of people don't want to pay that, they're able to actually make buses so much quicker. So they have devoted bus lanes then, because there's less traffic, so people then are much more willing to take mass transit. And you're able to obviously use that money for other things to improve transport in general and alternatives. So these are, that's not necessarily the only solution, obviously. What they're about is what the two Johns have talked about, which is this is a huge scale problem. And who makes ironically, the congestion pricing system technology, actually the smart camera that reads the license plate, is IBM. And it's run through IBM Stockholm, but it's IBM. They also have this in Singapore. So this is a huge economic opportunity to drive technology forward. But, this is such a scale problem. The global economy today is like a monster truck with the gas pedal stuck, and we've lost the key, okay? It's just growing and growing and growing. And that's a blessing. I mean, people are coming out of poverty, we know, faster than in larger numbers than any time in the history of the world. That's a blessing. But we have to be realistic about that. Everyone, there's a lot of chatter now. We're having a green revolution. We're having a green revolution. You say, oh, really? A green revolution? Have you ever been to a revolution, Carlos, where no one got hurt? Okay? That's the green revolution, okay? In the green revolution, everyone's a winner. Yeah, Exxon's green, Chevron's green, yeah, GM's green. They got a little yellow cap they put on their flex fuel cars when they finally got around to telling people they were flex fuel. In the green revolution, everyone's a winner. That's not a revolution. That's a party, okay? So we're having a green party now. It's a lot of fun. I get invited to all the dates. It's great fun. If you look at where we were 5 years ago and where we are today, it's a revolution. If you look at where we are today and where we need to be in 10 years, the scale of the challenge.
You lose your SUV in the revolution.
That's a party. We have a long, long way to go. So we have to be realistic about that. Realistic doesn't mean pessimistic. But we have to think about the real scale of the problem and what will be required to really drive it forward.
And you think it'll take things like literally pricing someone's ability to drive in from New Jersey or Connecticut into downtown New York, that it'll take that in order to really move it from the party to the revolution? That it'll take that kind of regulation?
Let's look at how the IT revolution happened. There was an IT revolution here because a context was created for companies and the message was very simple: change or die. Okay? Change or die. Wang Computer isn't with us anymore, okay? Burroughs, NCR, Data General, they have all gone to that computer place in the sky because a context was created of change or die. How do you create that context? With real regulation and real prices, okay? And so until and unless we price carbon, the externality, the pollution, you don't have a context where anybody really has to change. Now, the market's doing that a little on the demand side, but you need government to do it. My friend Nate Lewis at Caltech explains this, I think, the best. I can do it for you very quickly, Carlos. Say I invented here at Stanford the first cell phone. I came to you, Carlos, and said, I have invented a phone.
I'm ready to invest. I
invented a phone that you can carry in your pocket. You'd say, Tom, a phone I could carry in my pocket? I'll take 10. I say, Carlos, wait a minute. They're going to cost you $1,000 each. Say, a phone I could carry in my pocket? That would change my life. I sell you 10, I sell John 10, I sell everybody here 10. Take all that money. 6 months later, I'm back, a little smaller, a little more powerful phone. I'm down the volume cost curve. Now I'm on a roll. Come back a year later, I say, Carlos, remember that phone I sold you? Worked out pretty good for you, right? Right. Got another deal for you. See that light up there? I'm going to power it with solar energy. But it's going to cost you $100 more a month. What will you say? You'll say, Tom, remember that phone you sold me? That changed my life. In case you haven't noticed, I already have light. And I really don't care where the electrons come from, okay? So unless the government comes in and says, Carlos, from now on, you're going to have to pay for the CO2, the pollution, the cost of John Abizaid's salary to protect the oil. You're going to have to pay now. You're not going to have to pay $110 for that light. Then my $100 solar light, you'll take 10. And then I'm down the cost volume curve, and 6 months later, I'm back there because I've then gone to John Hennessy. Said, now what were you telling me about those new photovoltaic panels? I'll take 10 of those. Then you're down the cost volume curve. Without changing prices, you'll never trigger the market. And if you never trigger the market, you'll never trigger the solution at scale. So.
John Abizaid, I want to stay on the
His salary.
I want to stay on the topic of change, and I know you've written that you think that the military is only potentially 20% of the solution in terms of what's going on in the Middle East. I think you were the highest-ranking officer in the military who spoke Arabic. I think your mother family was originally from Lebanon. You've got a lot of pieces of this puzzle. How do you think about the diplomatic effort that's needed in order to move things forward in the region, particularly now that you've had a little bit of time, not a lot of time, to step away from the front lines?
Well, first of all, Carlos, I want to disagree with Tom about something. I don't think the Bush administration screwed up the Middle East. I think the British did. And an argument could be made that the Romans did before them.
Actually, John Abizaid, would you stay on that for a moment? Share a little bit more about that. Well, I'm not even going to put words in your mouth. Share a little bit more on that. Speak to that, please.
Well, first of all, look, we have to understand that no one in 5,000 years has ever controlled the Middle East. No outside power has or will. And what we have to do is figure out how we're going to help the people in the region help themselves. And I actually have a very optimistic view of what's going on out there. Surely there are these problems associated with the ideological spread of Islamic extremism. Surely there's a problem associated with nuclear proliferation. Certainly we've got difficulties in the Arab-Israeli problem. But on the other hand, there is a great hope in the region to join the rest of the world. And it is that hope that we have to bet on. And there are a lot of different ways to deal with that. And I would use the example of the first time I went into Baghdad in April of 2003. And you know, quite surprising, there wasn't an awful lot of damage. There was heavy fighting going around. But I did notice that there wasn't a single satellite dish on any roof. About 3 months later, there was a satellite dish on every roof. I can remember going up to a hilltop in Afghanistan where an enterprising young teacher had young males and females sitting together with a computer screen that was attached to a satellite and he was showing them the internet. And I can remember my commanders in the field saying, look, the Taliban begins where the road ends. And these things all meant to me that we must invest in the disadvantaged places of the globe if we're all to advance together. We've got to build roads. We have to take risk that we can invest in the future of the people in the region because they are so hungry for information. They don't want the extremists to win. Look what the Taliban gave the people of Afghanistan. Soccer stadium executions, no music, women unable to participate in anything going on in the society, national monuments being destroyed. They don't want to go back to those days. What we have to do is figure out how to build our national institutions for defense and security to deal with the problems of the 21st century, to cause the very great difficulties that exist in the world to somehow or other be addressed in a way that is not just about military force, but about development. We need to have companies invest in places like Iraq, invest in places like the Congo, invest in places like Afghanistan. The world wants to connect. Our job needs to be to figure out how to make that shaping actually take place. The other thing I'd say is that in the great parts of the Middle East where capital is flowing, two interesting things are happening. On the negative side, a certain amount of capital flows into the coffers of the extremists. But also to a very great extent, people are investing in education. They're investing in places like Stanford and Cornell and Harvard. They are longing for the opportunity to become part of the rest of the world. And so I think that we have to fight this fight in a way that makes sense, that allows the rest of the world to join us in peace and prosperity. And that is going to require a certain amount of military action to fight against those that don't want this integration to take place. but it also requires a tremendous amount of risk in investing in places where things are tough. And I think we need to do that. We have to invest in our State Department. It's too small. We have to have diplomacy that takes place abroad.
Are you calling in effect for significant new spending on the order of a Marshall Plan, if you will?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we're going to move forward into the 21st century, we need to have institutions that make it easier to help others help themselves, as opposed to the other way around of using the military instrument every time there's a problem out there.
Do you have a... Do you have any concern, the size of our military now, particularly post-surge, is it at a point that in your mind it's making it difficult to do the kinds of things that you're talking about doing? And if so, how quickly do you think we should reduce the troops that we currently have stationed in Iraq?
Well, let me use the example of my son-in-law, who about 3 days ago just came back from Iraq. 4 tours of combat, 1 in Afghanistan, went to Iraq, got wounded in Iraq, went back to Iraq. Then came back, spent some time at home with his family, and then went back to Iraq again. By the way, when he got wounded in Iraq, I saw him within 24 hours in the hospital, and I said, "What can I do for you?" And he said, "Get me back to my unit." These are the type of young people that are fighting for us over there. And we do need to honor them and thank them for what they're doing. But it's not my son-in-law that I'm worried about. It's my daughter and her 2 kids. And she's an Army kid. And she said to me, "Dad, I don't know that I can take another tour of duty over there." And if she won't take the tour of duty, he won't take the tour of duty. And we have built this very, very good armed forces that is tactically superb. We've never lost a battle in the 6 years that we've been fighting. But on the other hand, we're not making the progress that we need to be making. And it's very, very important for us to understand that progress is made when you bring not only the international community together, but also the soft power of the United States. And I know I'm talking too long, but let me just give you an example. Small areas in Afghanistan we built are called provincial reconstruction teams. The idea was to have a certain number of soldiers there, people from the State Department, people from the Department of Agriculture, CIA, you name it, all the various agencies of the U.S. government. We went to Jalalabad, one of the toughest areas in Afghanistan, and I saw one of these provincial reconstruction teams working absolutely perfectly. The military people were doing the security. The State Department young lady that was in charge out there had the respect and the admiration of the governor. The people from the Drug Enforcement Agency were providing alternative lifestyles outside of the opium crop that people normally depended upon. The CIA was helping protect the force and also learning about the extremists. And things worked well. I went back 6 months later, and only the military people were there. And so we must commit ourselves as a nation. We just can't commit our military to dealing with these tough tasks. I would rather have more State Department people in the field than more soldiers in the field. I'd rather have more DEA agents in the field than military forces in the field. And, you know, certainly bin Laden and his people have recognized this. They've decided that there is no neutrality on the battlefield. The UN flag is the enemy to them. Doctors Without Borders is the enemy to them. And it's important that in the international context, we pool our resources in a way to help those places where otherwise these very, very bad things for our future will develop.
Justice Breyer, the war on terror, the war on Iraq is spilled over not only around the globe in questions like Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo, but also we felt it here with questions about wiretapping and other things. Back in 2003, you spoke extensively, pretty openly, about civil liberties and how the U.S. should think about balancing the issues of civil liberties at a time of war. You've written a book as a sitting justice about active liberty and what role the court should play. Will you talk a little bit about what you see as the Supreme Court's role over the next several years in making sure that liberty is properly protected and some of the challenges to it?
Well, there are a couple of things about the Constitution. What you talk about is mostly, for us, the courts. And of course, there is a security problem, and we have a civil liberties tradition. And so what I've said is, well, what can you describe about the approach that I think the court has taken and will take? It's fairly general, what I say, but it's true and important. I think the first thing is that the Constitution does apply in time of war. That wasn't always true. Cicero said something which I learned. It wasn't at Stanford. I don't think they taught Latin at Stanford. They did. I had a great... But in high school, I think it was something like arma dicet leges silant. I'm not sure that was right. And I translated that as saying, when the cannons roar, the laws fall silent. And then someone said, "You idiot! The Romans didn't have cannons." But you see the point, and that was Cicero. Well, that isn't true. That isn't true, and it hasn't been true for some time. The Constitution and its protections apply in wartime as they do in peacetime. The second thing to keep in mind is that in most relevant respects, the constitutional provisions that safeguard human liberty have a degree of flexibility built in. For example, there's a protection against an unreasonable search and seizure. An unreasonable search and seizure. So if in peacetime a policeman sees someone grab a woman off the street and run into an apartment house, that policeman doesn't stop and get a warrant. There's an immediate need. Of course you go in. And normally there isn't that need, you get a warrant. Well, in wartime or even in time of terrorism, similar kinds of events may provoke similar need for similar responses. There's always a balancing at issue there. The third point, and this becomes harder, is, well, how do we get the right balance? Very hard. But I hate to say it, we're helped in this by lawyers. I don't hate to say it a lot. I don't hate to say it. Lawyers help us all the time. And here they have any lawyer who's defending somebody has two questions that in some form or other they'll ask the government. Say who's detaining a person, say without a lawyer, say on the ground he's dangerous. And the first question is a good question. Journalists use it too, Tom. Why? Why aren't you giving this person a lawyer? What is the problem? And there are many ways of requiring the government to respond. Maybe the response has to be secret. Why does it have to be secret? Does it still have to be secret? Can we have it in camera? Can we have a special group of judges? I mean, there are many ways to skin that cat, but you need an answer to the question why. And the second question is, if the why is satisfied, why not? And why not means, well, why not do it in a less restrictive way? You say to me, this man is so dangerous, he can't see a lawyer. Well, what about him seeing a lawyer who has security clearance? So dangerous, we can't let anyone near him. Are you sure? Have you convinced me why even we have that problem in Israel? Here's what they do. And sometimes the government's right, by the way. I hate to tell you, that's been known. And they say, well, this person is incredibly dangerous. They convince it. So we have to hold him without a lawyer. Oh, for how long? Oh, we're not sure. Come back this afternoon. Do you still need him without a lawyer? Try tomorrow. The next day. The day after that. In other words, if you're going to hold him for a week, it sounds less and less probable. A month? What? Really? You see? And there are many ways of skinning this cat to get the answer to the questions why and why not. And I pause on that because I want you to see and imagine, since I can't say it, the complexity that goes into answering those questions and the importance, on the one hand, of the courts recognizing the government's knowledge in this area, but not giving too much weight to it when civil liberties are at stake, and indeed what is too much. All right, now do you understand the kinds of questions that come up? And the only fourth thing that I think is important in our minds is recognize the court's own mistake. Own mistakes.
And do you see
Mistakes? When I was, 6 years old, I can remember only 20 miles from here, being driven. I couldn't drive at that time. My mother taking me in the car by Tan Fran racetrack. And she said that's the place where they held the Japanese. And she didn't say it in a friendly way. She didn't think it was a good idea to hold the Japanese. And my goodness, she was right. It was 100,000 American citizens. And they were held for all in the war. Go look at that film about World War II right now, and you'll see some of those stories. And it was J. Edgar Hoover who said, "I have no evidence that any one of them has committed any sabotage." And it was Earl Warren who said, "The very fact we don't have that evidence means they must be up to it." Well, I'm sorry. Earl Warren, who is a great civil libertarian and a great American and a hero of our country, said that was a blot on his own record. And later years, he was very sorry about that. And he thought that that showed that, which is true of all human beings, we can get carried away. We can be caught up in the righteousness of our cause. And in a sense there, the courts are a kind of brake. You see, I can't give you answers to the questions, but I can say the question's difficult, and I can give you a kind of outline or approach that I believe we'll use. So far, I've said this sometimes, we've had 3 cases. We have another one on our docket involving Guantanamo. And I like to say this sometimes to foreign audiences, though it just happened to work out that way. The last case pitted the most unpopular person in America, almost, the driver of bin Laden. And he sued, and on the other side was the President of the United States, the most powerful man in the world, perhaps on anyone's list of 10. And bin Laden's driver won. All right? That's the constitutional system. He won because he was right. And that's the system that's important, to keep and hard to keep and so forth. You know that 4th of July speech. But all I can tell you is that 4th of July speech is absolutely real. And we're all, not just the courts, in the middle of this.
Justice Breyer, I want to turn to one other thing that you've talked a good bit about, which is to what extent international law should be involved in a variety of discussions. And there's been a little bit of controversy. I think one of your colleagues doesn't always agree with you on that topic, but certainly both when we talk about issues of terrorism and civil liberties and the possibility of looking at whether it's treaties or law from other countries, or on issues of climate change, the wisdom of looking to international law, not necessarily for definitive guidance, but perhaps for input. Can you talk a little bit about what you see in the years ahead and to what extent international law?
Well, the problem here, first you've looked up every controversial thing I've ever said, and then and the problem is not can I talk a little bit, the problem is will I talk too much? And the fact is, listening to this, it's a very interesting conversation to me. I learn a lot from these things. I'm certainly not an expert in the environment, but I listen to people and I hear the generals saying, yeah, we have a problem in the Middle East. I guess I understand that. He understands it better. And our experts in the environment, everyone seems to agree, there's a problem of oil security. And so we better get away from oil. That'll help us if we get away from that. And I hear Tom Friedman and Bryson there, and they're giving 5 reasons why. And finally, I heard a word I'll come back to in a second, and I heard our experts here say we have lots of ways of going about this. There isn't a problem with means, and then the word I hear from them after 43 minutes and 58 minutes is the word price. Uh-oh. Price. You mean this isn't free? And indeed, I suddenly hear people say, they say biofuel. Boo, boo. I didn't know we were supposed to boo now. I'm 6 months behind in my Atlantic monthly reading. I thought they were supposed to cheer. No, we're supposed to boo. Okay. In other words, things change, and they change rapidly. And from that, I get the thought, well, this is a changing area, and nobody knows exactly what the right answer is. And I think maybe some answers are obvious, and then the government should come in and say 60-mile-per-gallon cars or something. And then I think other answers, they don't know which is going to work. We may end up like those rubber plantations in Brazil with great opera houses in the jungle crawling up because they guessed wrong on what was the right technology. I mean, therefore they said the word price. Price. Raise the price of oil. Raise the price of oil. Raise it through the roof. And then people will look for substitutes. So I cheer. Then what I hear is, yeah, that's because you just make these huge salaries in the judiciary, and we haven't thought about the average. I am thinking about the average person. And isn't that the problem? That the average person's going to have to pay too, and quite a lot. And now you hear these terrible words, tax. My God, remember Fred Kahn? Fred Kahn was told by Jimmy Carter, don't refer to the word recession. So he said, okay, we're about to have a banana. Fine, let's put a banana on oil. But now that is why I'm coming back to something that, and then that'll pay for your off-peak pricing, which is an idea that's been around for a long time. And now, here's why I come back to the Constitution. Because this is not the first such discussion I've heard. Maybe one of the best informed, but not the first. I think, well, you sort of get three reactions from people. One is the reaction of called hand-wringing. Oh dear, we'll never get it done. We are doomed. The insects take over next. I mean, this is, you hear that? And the second reaction is, well, we hate to do it because we're really Democrats at heart, but we're going to fool everybody. We're going to do things like marketable rights. Nobody knows what that is, and it happens to be quite similar to a tax, but we won't call it a tax, so we'll call it marketable rights. Sounds great. Nobody understands it. Perfect. And then we'll get, I mean, you know, let's hide the ball. Well, I see that, but then they're not true Democrats at heart. And fortunately or unfortunately, my own work with the Constitution says that that Constitution, first and foremost, does one thing. It creates a democracy. And a certain kind of democracy. It protects human liberty, equality, separation of powers, rule of law, but first and foremost, a democracy, which means people make their decisions in democratic ways, which means they talk to each other, they clamor, they scream, they rant, they rave, they write articles, they talk to have groups, they have meetings. Think of what goes on with the PROTECT Act. Everybody hates it except when they're screaming. I cheer because it's the democratic process in action. Okay, I'm the only one who likes that. They do like it and they follow it. It's all over the world. It's not everywhere, but many places. Many places. And so what? The same democratic forms, the same belief in human rights, the same ideas. And what does that tell me? That tells me that there is only only one way to bring these things about. And that is through democratic conversation. And that democratic conversation is not pleasant. It is not pleasant. And above all, it is not easy. And above all, it requires clarity. And above all, it means explaining to ordinary people what they, we hope, will do. And I think Learned Hand said this best when we conduct that democratic conversation, here and abroad. He said, what is at the heart of that spirit of liberty? He called it the spirit of liberty. He said at the heart of that spirit of liberty is the not being too sure of oneself, listening as well as talking, finding out what others think, engaging in a conversation, and out of that, we hope, here and abroad, will emerge the kinds of solutions that you're talking about. No guarantee at all. But for myself, who work with the document, I just don't see any other way of going about it.
You always know you're having a good time when things come to an end quickly. We've only got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to direct a question to Tom Friedman and ask him to give us a short answer on it, and then I'm going to ask each person here to give us a final thought, and would appreciate that. Tom Friedman, to Justice Breyer's point about the democratic conversation, we've got a presidential election going on. First time in more than 50 years that we don't have a sitting president or vice president running, so it's very wide open, both on the Republican and on the Democratic side. Talk about 2 or 3 of the candidates who, in your mind, are talking most persuasively about the questions of energy and security and the various ways that we've heard here that all these things can intersect. Which of the candidates on either side of the aisle have you heard the most from to date?
None.
Short answer.
Loud and short. He's not running.
Are there people sitting today in the Senate or in state houses or even in the House of Representatives who you think have a particularly forward-looking view on these issues and you think are some of the leaders we should be listening to maybe a little bit more?
The people that I sort of like to talk to at the political level are people like Mike Bloomberg, the mayor of New York City,
Right.
Arnold Schwarzenegger, the governor of California. I think are 2 people who have really stepped out and catalyzed a coalition. All the candidates have different climate/energy positions, and some are really, in fairness, much more detailed than others. Governor Richardson, Chris Dodd, who has actually used the T word, carbon tax word. But what strikes me is that it's just kind of one of their platforms. No one has made it a real centerpiece. And I actually think it is the centerpiece. So for my taste, it's never going to quite be enough. But in fairness to them, people are, I think, thinking about it. And my hope is so much of this is being driven from below now. So much is being driven by business, seeing it as the economic opportunity, that whoever is the next president will inherit a different context. But whoever is the next president really matters on this issue. For the reasons that Justice Breyer alluded to in part, whoever writes the rules on this is really important. The rules here really matter. And the next president is really important for another reason. I covered the State Department. I covered Secretary of State Baker for 4 years. Then I covered the first year of Bill Clinton's White House. And I learned something as a reporter from that. The difference from covering the State Department and covering the president is truly the minor leagues to the major leagues. When you're covering the president, you see someone who has the greatest bully pulpit in the world. And imagine with all this stuff coming up and all of this stuff coming from business, we have a leadership in this country that rather than can't get the word conservation out of their mouth, actually uses the bully pulpit of the presidency to say, you know what, look, George Bush mentioned corn ethanol in one paragraph in the State of the Union. The corn ethanol industry went nuts. Obviously it was backed, but it triggered a whole industry. Imagine if the next president said, I'm getting rid of my limousine, I'm going to have a plug-in, armor-plated hybrid car, okay? Imagine what would happen. So who wins? Who wins this time? It always matters. This time, it really matters.
John Bryson, I'm going to start with you and would love to get a final thought. And we'll, Tom, I'm going to skip you, move around the room, and come back to you. I'll give you a breather. But John Bryson, any final thoughts as we talk about courting disaster and the fight for oil, water, and a healthy planet?
Well, I want to pick up on what Justice Breyer said and Tom supplemented. But all these things, let's just take global warming. It's going to cost something to deal effectively with this. Energy prices are going to have to go up. It's not all nirvana on new technologies. At least the early stages will cost a lot of money. There will be dislocations. And I've been spending a lot of time in Washington because I believe, as Tom does, that getting the rules right around how we deal with global warming is as important an issue as I've dealt with in my career. In the energy field, it's just incredibly important. And it's not hugely encouraging in the short term to talk with people back there, because the first response is almost invariably an entirely tactical response. Do the Democrats want to pass anything during the Bush administration? Because the Bush administration might get some credit when they have such a pathetic record in this world. Why give them anything? Nothing. I believe nothing will happen for a couple of years. Now, it's a tough, on the side of those that want to do something, it's way oversimplified. There's a tendency to say it's going to be easy, it's not going to cost anything, we just have to salute to make it happen. None of that's true either. So, Justice Breyer called for the democratic process and dialogue, and we need to intensify that. We need to have it at the kind of levels that I think we're having here tonight. And that's not much happening anywhere, in my judgment. And I do agree with Tom. What I see this in most dialogues on public issues is kind of there's this and there's that and 5 other things, and people don't get it, I don't think.
Pam Matson, final word?
Well, follow on that. I think Tom talked about the evolution that we've been going through over the last 5 years, and we have made a lot of progress, which is one of the reasons I'm optimistic about this. But I have the sense that we have to push really hard. We have to get really, really serious about this as a nation and as a world. And that's going to take investment, and it's going to cost. And it's time to do that. We've got a good place to start. The other comment I want to make really goes back to General Abizaid's point about diplomacy, and that is that I think we have to change the way we do diplomacy to recognize that the world is facing climate change, some climate change, no matter what we do, facing challenges related to producing enough food to feed the world's population and getting water in the right places when we need it. And I think our nation's role here in our diplomacy is to incorporate a sense of reducing the vulnerability of people both in this country and around the world to the challenges coming ahead.
For those of you who don't know, if I can put a plug in, Dean Matson's work, which has earned her the MacArthur Genius Grant, some of her work has been based in Mexico. In part has looked not only at new technologies, but new ways to engage the various stakeholders and coming up with practical solutions. And so as she speaks about diplomacy, for those of you who aren't familiar with her work, it's certainly some of the most cutting-edge work in that regard. President Hennessy, a final thought?
Well, we talked earlier about the university's role as a technology inventor, but we also have a role as a great educational institution, and several people have touched on it. Tom mentioned Azim Primji, the leading Muslim businessman in India. Azim Primji is a graduate of this university. General Abizaid talked about the need to educate people around the world about the role of education, particularly in the developing world. It's something we have to think about, not only in terms of the students we bring here, but how Stanford goes out to the rest of the world. It's great to bring the world to Stanford, but it's important for Stanford to go out and touch the rest of the world. We can play an important role here. You look at the issue of global warming. Why is there still lingering public uncertainty? Because the scientific community hasn't yet done what it really needs to do to help the American public understand this very complex problem and the dynamics. We've got to play that role. Certainly people like Tom play that role in getting a complex story out to people. Al Gore did it in his movie. But the university and the scientific community has to also embrace this as an important part of their public mission.
Justice Breyer, I understand that you were not sure about the topic, and so just to be safe, you brought another former justice along here as well today. I understand that Justice O'Connor joins us here today.
Very good.
One Stanford trained justice is good, but two is better. Justice Breyer, final thoughts?
My final thought is that there were 4 Stanford graduates on the Supreme Court at the time we were there. Final thought, Stanford can't do it alone, but it certainly can help, and thank you very much.
Very good. General Abizaid?
I guess my final thought is that the world is too small for us to turn our back to it. There are things about our country that matter to the world. Our values, our Constitution, our freedoms, and we must understand that we can't walk away from the role of leadership that has been thrust upon us. The key for us is not how to lead, it's really to shoulder the burdens, to make the world a better place, to have the constitutional conversations that all of us know have to be done, but to retreat from the world that needs us would be the greatest crime of all.
And so it's appropriate that we will turn to our star columnist and reporter to bring things to an end. Tom Friedman, the final thought.
Well, that's a heavy load. You know, something John said, Abizaid, that really resonates with me, which is that, you know, the Taliban begins where the road ends. That's really true. These are people who, you know, believe women should be shut inside, that girls shouldn't be educated. But if we're gonna lead that road, it seems to me 2 things are really necessary. One is that we have to be the best country we can be. Not just sort of good, not 80%. If we're going to tell the world you're either with us or against us, we have got to be the very best country we can be. But the second thing I would say is that we are necessary. You know, a lot of bad things happen in the world without us. Not a lot of good things happen without an America fully engaged. But we can't do it alone. We can't do it alone and put it on the shoulders of, you know, John Abizaid's kids and 140 or 160,000 other Americans and their families. But we also can't do it alone without the rest of the world. You know, John is so right. This is a long struggle. We have to remain engaged. But if it's only about America, we can't win. Bill Maher actually said it best in his book. We have to make them fight, all of us. If we do that, they don't stand a chance. If it's just John's daughter and son, whether they go back for the 5th time, then the bad guys are going to win.
I want to thank everyone for coming today to this roundtable panel, this discussion. I found it incredibly interesting. I hope everyone else did, and I hope you will join me in giving our incredible panel not only applause, but standing applause, maybe.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.